thing as the standard tutorial on the xtext website. So it doesn't really, I mean, you can always look at that as well, but this is exactly what we've been doing right here. So, and so this is a little bit different from what's there. So this is my clips with xtext enabled. And let's make a new xtext project. Of course, I mean, all I do with my clips is to make xtext projects, so of course it's sitting there and ready. So xtext project. The project, the package structure is a little bit unconventional in some ways, at least here in Eclipse. I don't know what it's like in IntelliJ, but I suspect it would be the same because it generates a lot of different artifacts. So here you have to imagine there's a whole bunch of people who had the ability to generate lots of stuff, and also, as you'll see later on, had the ability to make their own languages when they face difficult problems, and they really did that to some extent. So, and this is still called software customization dot symbol entity. Here we go. And yeah, symbol entity. And I have, so one thing which is important here is to decide on an extension for your programs. This is like .java or .py for Python. You have to decide an extension because Eclipse uses this to activate xtext, because you also, of course, get an editor that works with your language. So let's call it simple entity SEM. And we're good. Now, this is where I write my BNF. And here I have a bunch of rules. So there's a number of things happening here that which is kind of hidden from you, but you can do other things if you wanted to use a different meta model or a different lexing rules, other things, lots of things you can configure. But here we are happy to let xtext do things for us, and we are happy to use the standard lexer. Now, I'm just going to implement what we had before. So our model here, you can call it anything you want, but let's just call it model. Or let's call it, we call it system. So a system is, let's see here, a bunch of entities. So in xtext, I give names to things. So this is because I want to generate the meta model as well. So this is going to give me a class called system that has a whole bunch of entities in it. So I'm going to say entities is going to be the name, like the field that holds this list of entities, because I want to generate the meta model as well. Plus equals means there's a whole bunch of them, put them all into an array or this array list or whatever. Like this. And of course now it's complaining because I haven't defined entity. So this means a system has a whole bunch of entities that are stored in basically a list of entity, which is what I want as well in my meta model. An entity, now that starts with the keyword entity, and then there's an ID, and we call that the name. Now, in xtext, name is magic in the sense that when you, or magic, it's a special keyword. If you give an attribute the name, it means it uses it to resolve the name later on. This is like what I did here. I said that this defines the name. This means that in other parts of the program, if I refer to an entity, this is the place where the name of the entity was defined. If I just wrote ID, for example, now it's not read anymore, I don't get the name resolution. So if I wanted to do it myself, or if I, for other reasons, I didn't want it, then that would be different. This is the name of this object. And now I want to say there might be an extends. So I do this. And then there might be extends and a base, which is, now offhand this is what I would write. The base is an identifier, but in fact the base must be an entity identifier. And xtext has a special syntax for this. Sorry. So the base must be an identity. This means that if, as I'm typing my program, if what I write here is not a legal entity, it can signal to me that there's an error. And of course, because it wouldn't be able to do the name resolution. So that wouldn't be a legal program. So, and this is a question mark, so it's optional, just like in the BNF over here. Then there must be an open brace. I'm just going to use a new line here, but new lines don't matter. Now, here in our BNF, we wrote that there was either an attribute or relation. There are different ways of doing this in xtext. Something which is convenient is to actually use inheritance. So I might say that there's a whole bunch of members here, which is a member, and then I'm going to say a member is either an attribute or relation. This is like we would normally do it, model it in object orientation. This also gives me the kind of meta model I might be interested in. So this gives me a meta model where an entity has a bunch of members, and members is an abstract class with two concrete subclasses, attribute and relation, which I'm going to add in a second. Actually, let's just make this be on one line because it's very short. So there's a bunch of members. A member, that's either an attribute or a relation. An attribute has the keyword attribute. And then I'm just going to use name here, even though we probably won't use it for name resolution. But there's a name and a colon and a type, which is an ID. Okay, so that's the attribute. I might have a relation, which is a name, which is an ID, and a colon, and then when it's a relation, it has to reference to an entity, which is what I wrote over here as well. Although there might be a star. Okay, so let's just say there might be a star. So this means there's a Boolean attribute on the relation, which is true if there was a star and false otherwise. Okay? So if there's a star, it's true, or let's just call it maybe multiple, because it's going to add other things as well. So multiple, that's true if there's a star and false otherwise, because I don't want to have the star, I don't care about the star. From the model point of view, I want to know, is this a multiple relation or not? And then there's let's call it 2, that's an entity. And then there might be an inverse. If there's an inverse, then inverse, colon. And then there's a name, which is an ID. I'm not used to inverse name. I can't use name twice because that would be like having two fields with the same name in Java. Inverse name, and there might be inverse multiple equals a star, and we want, okay, let's just break this down into 2 lines. Okay, so an entity name, that might be a base and a bunch of members. Members is attribute or relation. Attribute starts with the keyword attribute, has a name, and a type, which is an ID. Relation has the keyword relation. Multiple, to some entity. Inverse might be there. I forgot the question mark at the end here because the inverse is optional. Yes? Ah, yes. Very good. Yes. So in fact, this one here without the question mark will always be true, because the Boolean indicates whether the star is there, and my BNF required the star to always be there, because I forgot the question mark, so it was redundant. This is what I meant. Thanks. Now, these are the kind. This is a. I mean, it's a good example because you haven't seen the xtext BNF before, I assume. But we can talk about the syntax in a meaningful way, and it's fairly easy to see what's going on. You might miss a few things, but it's not too bad for debugging. And I'm just going to just saying, sorry. So, back here. And now I need to find simple entity. And here I have my xtext. MWE, that's a language for modeling workflows. So that's the DSL for modeling, having the IDE do complicated things. And this file was generated automatically. You can look at it, but you don't need to do anything with it. Here I can right-click and run as generate xtext artifacts. This means take the BNF stuff that I wrote here and generate the parser and all the magic. So let's do that. Now the first time you... Sorry? I'm recording, yes. Now actually a small thing that happens here is the first time you run xtext artifacts, I'm not sure how... the first time it sometimes needs internet access, because it uses a parser called Antler, which is a separate parsing tool, which is a bit more primitive than xtext, but also more bigger. It's more efficient, and you can use it to do bigger and more complicated things. Antler is not included with xtext, so it downloads it and uses it. So this is just if you're on a train somewhere without internet connection, then it might be a little bit surprising. But once you have run it the first time, then it doesn't need to download it again. So this is actually all that we needed to get the parser, and there were no errors. There could of course be errors in my DSL, and then the errors would appear down here, and errors in the parser, we're going to look at that later. But right now I'm going to run as, so I can take this project and run that as an Eclipse application. This means that what just happened was that a whole bunch of Eclipse extensions were automatically generated, and now I'll launch a new Eclipse that has my new language included. So now, just to make things simple, I'm just going to use a Java project here. So this is the simple entity test. Finish. Okay. And now, so you can do things to get all the menus and all the things you want. But out of the box, it's a little bit primitive. So now I'm going to create a file. And this is my university. Do you remember the extension? Simple entity, like this, right? Yeah. If you forget the extension, then you can't make programs in your new language. So remember the extension. You can actually find it inside the MWE2 file, but remember the extension, that's easier. Do you want to add the xtext nature? So do you want this to be the thing I just created? Yes, please. Okay, now I have an editor. Hello is not a legal program here, so I need to write entity. There's a keyword, of course, and then so this is the person. Okay, now I have a legal program, and then a person has a name, which is a string, and an age, which is an integer. Ooh. So now there's something wrong actually. See here it's saying, oh, there shouldn't be a name. I was actually expecting a close brace here. So there's probably a bug in my BNF here. Oh, I forgot I had these keywords, attribute and relation. So this is an attribute name and an attribute like this. Okay. Entity student extends, I can write person here, this. If I wrote something else, it would be legal because it has to be able to resolve the name. I can even click on it and jump to the definition because it knows how things fit together here. Now a student has an attribute ID, which is a string. Then we have a relation see here, follows, which is a whole bunch of courses, which has an inverse, which is participates. Okay, and of course it's complaining because I haven't defined course yet. Entity course, and now it's happy. And a course has a title which is a string. And again, that's an attribute like this. So, from this xtext specification, I got a parser. It actually also, and let me show you, creates a model for you, and it creates an Eclipse plugin that recognizes your language. So now, of course, the next thing we want, and that's the last step, is to add a generator, which we haven't talked about yet. And you also haven't really seen what the model looks like. I'm just saying there's a model in there. Now, in xtext, so different this is called an xtext. It's what is called a language workbench. It's designed to make it easy to make languages. And if we look in here, then there's a bunch of different things you can add here. So, and some of these are about checking that the program is legal and then giving feedback inside Eclipse if it's not. And there are different rules for this. But right now we have this. One thing which we're very interested in is the generator. So the generator is what takes the model and creates code from it. Now the question is how to do that. I'm just going to pause here for a moment.